calling the meeting to order, and the first order of business is Mr. John and the discussion of the October 14th flashing report.
How would you like to do this? Do you have any questions you'd like to start with first? Do you want a quick overall summary of what we did and what we found?
I'm not sure you need to focus very much on exactly what you did. Maybe talk about where and what you found.
Sure. Okay. I should be able to share my screen, I believe. Let me give that a try.
Well, we have been successful with the same equipment before, so I'm sure we will manage.
Wonderful. Is my screen up on the screen?
It is, sir.
Okay. So I'll keep it high level. As always, pause me, ask questions along the way. And then if we need to get into more nitty gritty after, I'm happy to do that as well. So this go around, this is now our third report. The prior two reports, there was an initial one that focused on the general overall visual condition of the asphalt shingles, among other things. The second report focused on the test cuts of the roof at various locations to verify as-built conditions. And this current report and this latest effort focused on what you're seeing highlighted in yellow here, which is basically the clear story rising walls. That's the rising wall that has the band of windows on both sides of the upper roof, and what we call the cheek walls, which is the masonry wall that is also rising from the lower roof, but it goes up at a slope. So we did some additional visual observations as part of this effort, but also we did some test cuts at the, I'm going to call them they're GFRC panels. I'm just going to call them the panels just for simplicity, so I don't keep on saying that acronym. But GFRC stands for Glass Fiber Reinforced Concrete, GFRC. So we removed some of those panels as part of this effort, and we also made some test cuts in the brick masonry to further supplement our findings on what might be causing some of the leakage that has been observed at these locations. Okay. We also did another kind of look through some of the existing documentation that we had. There was some new documentation on submittal form and shop drawing form we were able to find, so it helped further supplement some of our findings. I'm not going to dwell on that now. Some visual observations focusing first on the clear story rising wall. Again, that's the kind of wall you're looking at here, and these are the panels I was talking about. Similar to previous observations, we're seeing a lot of deteriorated sealant still between panel to panel joints, but also we did notice that I believe you all had someone come out and replace a lot of the sealants between the windows and the panels. We did see some deficiencies with that sealant still, even though it was newer. So we talk about some of the conditions there. We saw some misaligned panels, whether that was original during construction or not is not known at this time, but if it is moving, that could cause additional stress in the sealants. I'll get into why the sealant is important for this particular application in a little while. And here's just a nice close-up image of what appears to be the original sealant between panel to panel joints, already showing distress, cracking, crazing, separation from the panels. And this is an example of the newer sealant that did not appear to be bonded completely still to the windows, right? All this kind of plays into how is water getting potentially in and through the windows and the panel system, and what happens to that water as it travels down that wall and meets the roof, right?
John, what kind of sealant would they be using?
When you mean kind of sealant, you're talking about chemistry, whether it's like a silicone or a polyurethane.
Yeah.
I don't know what they used out there. Off the top of my head, I would have to double check the submittals to see if they submitted on the original sealant or even the new sealant. I mean, you might have that in your record for whoever you had to go out there. But typically we see silicone sealants or your polyurethane sealants for this type of application.
Thanks.
So let's quick summary of some of the visual observations on the clear story rising wall. Now on the cheek walls again, so these are the walls that kind of align with the slope of the roof. In some areas you have brick and some metal flashings, and in some areas you still do have the panels, the GFRC panels. Some of the things we're seeing with the masonry, let me take a step back. Some of the things we're seeing visually with the panels is still some misalignment here, as shown in this image. Just things aren't lining up perfectly. It might go to workmanship, it might go to movement of panels or inadequacy of the securement of the panels, but that's just a visual observation we made. We're also seeing that the brick coursing is not, is not up to current standards, if you will, in terms of evenness and brick course, evenness of the brick coursing, and it's a little bit wavy. And this image just kind of depicts how the coursing is not level all the way across. It might go to the workmanship of the person who installed the brick masonry at this location. Here's another example of a panel that was misaligned or was kicking out at one of the cheek walls. And just some more deteriorated sealants, again, between your panels on the cheek walls as well. We typically start our evaluation and our reports with visual observations first. What are we seeing before we start digging into the systems and opening things up? So we're still on the visual observations. There were some open gaps in sealants and just what appeared to be a direct open joint for water to blow in at one location. That's what this image is showing. Not only were the brick coursings not level, or the actual course or the bed joint of the brick wasn't level in a straight line, we're also seeing that the brick masonry was a little bit bowed inward, bowed outward. So they're not plumb vertically. Again, more of a workmanship item, it seems. Inconsistently tooled mortar joints going against the workmanship of the person who installed the brick masonry, and deteriorated actual deteriorated mortar already after 7 years or so since this building was built. So a good masonry wall shouldn't see these types of distress in need of mortar repointing for at least 20 years, right? Again, I'll talk what that means in a little while and why it's important. We're looking at these things. What does it mean for the ability of water to get through your wall system, right? I'll get there in a moment. Other conditions with the clear story rising wall had to do with the actual flashing. We call this step flashing right here. Step flashing is where the bottom flashing ties in with the roof. Basically, it steps down and is supposed to integrate with the asphalt shingles to help keep water out of the roof at this transition. And then these kind of step flashing, counter flashing pieces are there to help kick any water that gets through the brick masonry back outside on top of your roof system, so it's not leaking inside. In general, just from a workmanship visually, the shape and the size of the step flashing was not consistent. It looks like they had covered some of these weep joints with metal flashing, and in one area there was some severe bowing going on with this metal flashing. So that's kind of our general visual observations before we started opening up some of these components, right? So first, starting with the clear story rising walls, due to the size of the large panels between the windows, and also the small, what I call a sill panel below the big panel, we couldn't remove these two panels without really opening up a can of worms with that small time window that we had on site. So we limited ourselves to opening the windowsill panel only, and we did that at 2 locations. So right when we removed it, which is the second image here, what we're looking for is what kind of flashing provisions do they have that we couldn't see from just our roof openings before. How do those flashings tie in with the wall? How do they tie in with the window? And really, what I said earlier, when you have failed sealant joints in this type of panel system and water gets through behind the panels, what methods or what protections do you have in place to capture that water and get it back outside onto the roof? So that's what we were kind of looking at. I know I'm getting pretty detailed here already, but in general, at the clear story rising walls, what we're seeing is there is a one piece I'm going to call it a through wall flashing, which is kind of shown by this dashed pink outline. That's the general profile of it. So there's a vertical leg, a horizontal leg, a vertical leg, and another horizontal leg that goes over top of the roof. Almost consistent with what the design shows. The design shows it stopping on the horizontal here. The contractor ended up throwing an extra vertical leg on it. And they also tried to seal it to the actual front face of the window frame. And that's the sealant you're seeing with this yellow arrow pointing to it. So there was some effort made on the contractor's part to create some kind of seal between the through-wall flashing and the window assembly. However, some things that we noticed, to help keep the panels in place, they have kind of inverted, it's hard to see in this photo here, inverted L clips that were fastened through the through-wall flashing. There is no sealant over that fastener. There's no sealant over top of this angle. So any water that happened to get through that metal panel could still theoretically get through the through-wall flashing here. Another area they could get through is from the surface seal, which we don't really like to rely on surface seals because they're not long-term sealant joints. So these are some potential clues as to how water might migrate in past the through-wall flashing that exists behind these panels. So this image here shows how the metal flashing comes out over top of the roof. There was no kind of seal between the bottom of that metal flashing and the asphalt shingles, which we would hope there would be in a kind of best practice industry standard viewpoint. So that wind-driven rain does, in our opinion, have the ability of rolling up underneath this metal flashing and rolling in the roof in that fashion as well. This is an example of hard to visualize here as well, but this is the surface seal. We kind of bowed it out a little bit to see what we saw underneath it, and we did see that there was some blue membrane flashing underneath, which I think is a good thing. But that blue flashing, we believe, ties in underneath the roof system with the vapor barrier. So that blue membrane isn't acting as a secondary barrier. When water gets through your through-wall flashing, it's hitting that blue membrane, traveling in your roof system underneath your asphalt shingles, wetting the insulation, and it may or may not surface as interior leakage, right? If you have a continuous vapor barrier and that water staying on top of that vapor barrier on top of your deck, it's just running over top until it finds either a weak point or just finds a different way out. But it is wetting the insulation, and that is indicative of our initial study where we did some of those infrared images where you see that discoloration of wet areas. Also indicative of those test cuts where we actually physically saw wet insulation, right? So again, we're trying to find the sources of leakage in these areas. I'll try to drive the point home here at the end. So that's a clear story. We did a second clear story opening. We found very similar conditions at the second one. So one was done on, let's just call it the north clear story rising wall. One was done on the south clear story rising wall. Very similar conditions, some very subtle differences in how they attach the metal panels though. But otherwise, all else seemed pretty equal between the two areas for construction. Cheek walls. We did remove a GFRC panel, and we also made some openings in this brick masonry, right? So for the panel that was removed, right away saw some kind of red flags here. There was some type of metal flashing provision in place. Similar, and any metal flashing that we saw was penetrated with fasteners without sealant provisions. But we also saw this membrane flashing is bonded to the insulation, as shown in these images. Well, that flashing should be going through the insulation and tying to the actual weather barrier behind the insulation. So there is no continuity there that we saw at this upper cheek wall opening. If water is getting through the joints of the GFRC panels that are deteriorated, it could very well travel against the insulation, get behind the membrane, and could find its way on the inside, right? Also, we saw that this blue membrane was discontinuous at this particular location. As you look down the cheek wall, going down the slope of the roof, it stops, right? So just another opportunity for water to get in and potentially behind the metal flashing provisions that are in place. Right. I'm gonna skip these photos. This just shows how there's some subframing for the panels that have fasteners that aren't sealed, right? We already kind of talked about that concept. And we also showed, very hard to see in these images, but the roof vapor barrier that is over the roof, the steel deck is not continuous with the wall membrane, right? So there is a potential for condensation and moisture to enter into the roof assembly due to that discontinuity. Okay. Brick openings, similar kind of conditions as we discussed. Here's that through-all flashing. One big thing we noticed, if water, so these are designed to take, so brick masonry veneers are designed to take on water. Brick is porous. Water will soak through it like a sponge, albeit usually slowly when it's in good condition, but it's designed to take on water. There's usually an airspace, and then as water is leaking or dripping down the backside of that brick, down the wall, you hit these metal flashings that are intended to kick that water back out. Given the configurations of the metal flashings, if water is traveling down this yellow membrane, hits this metal flashing, you hope it's pitched properly so it comes back out, but they don't have upturned end dams is what we call it. So there's a very good chance that water can come down, travel laterally, and leak inside your roof system. And best practice, industry standard practice is to have those upturned end dams to help contain that water and give it no ability of rolling off the sides, right? So they didn't have upturned end dams. Okay, so that's just a concept I wanted to cover. Discontinuous wall insulation is another thing that we saw behind the brick. So the walls aren't insulated properly at those locations. And then one final opening we did, actually, I think we did 2 brick masonry openings, similar conditions at both. These images just further show how the consistency of how they set the bricks, well, it was not consistent, if you will. The bedding thickness of the mortar was not consistent. Some areas very thin. And then finally, we did do an opening at where that metal flashing was bowing out at the cheek wall. And we just saw that, you know, when they built the brick behind that metal flashing, they didn't bother trying to tool the mortar or anything like that. So there's a lot of open voids and pockets in that mortar. You know, yes, it's theoretically supposed to be protected by the metal flashing, but I suspect that inadequate tooling of these joints may have resulted in some shifting of the brick, which may have resulted in the bowing of that metal flashing, right? Okay.
John, one quick question.
Sure.
When you talk about the upturn ends, are those supposed to occur at the weep holes?
So they don't have to. Ideally, you have a weep hole for every step flashing. And if I'm going to draw for this, you know, for this particular one right here, let's just focus on this. If I'm going to draw in a schematic end dam, what it might look like is a vertical leg coming up, coming in, coming down like this. And also in a perfect world, it looks like they stop these flashing as an L-shaped and they rely on membrane to tie over top. When we do our metal flashing through design, we want a vertical leg of metal flashing to continue up as well the back, because that's a rigid material, a lot more reliable than a membrane. And there's ways that membrane can become damaged during brick construction when mortar droppings start falling, right? If you create a hole in that metal, that membrane, and there is no upturn on the backside of that metal flashing, that's just another potential for water to get in. So when I draw this horizontal leg here, this is what we normally would want to see. And then there would also be an end dam on this side as well. Apologies for the crude sketching, but I'm on the fly here. I hope the concept's getting across. So, give me a second. Okay, so the weep hole, it could be right at the end here, but even if it's in the middle here, you're creating a 3-sided upturn So still, if the water wants to travel left or right, it's either going to find its way through the weep hole in the middle, or if it's pitched the wrong way and it's water starting to accumulate against this end dam, usually you'll still see some seeping out where the mortar joint comes in contact with the metal flashing, because that's not really a long-term bond there, right? So there's still ways for that water to kick back out when the weep's located in the middle. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So that's kind of as quick a summary as I could possibly do on our actual observations. We need to do any more hazmat testing this go around for materials that we may have uncovered in the wall. Again, we didn't see any asbestos containing materials in the roof test cuts previously, and the risk for asbestos containing materials to be elsewhere in the wall is low, but that may be something that comes up as part of a construction project, depending on what the scope of work is. There might be some additional testing needed for some of those materials to get yourself clear, right? Clear with the Mass DEP requirements there. I'm happy to go into that more detail as needed. So what are we talking about here? What in discussion, so keeping in line with our previous report themes, what started as a buckling asphalt shingle evaluation turned into a little bit more intensive, right? A little more involved. But one of the kind of consistent themes we were talking about is, how can asphalt shingles buckle? There's multiple things we talk about in the first report. One of them that was supplemented a little bit by this effort is the lack of a dedicated vapor barrier. As we saw with the cheek walls, there is no continuity there between the roof vapor barrier and the wall. As such, any moisture from the inside has whether it's humidified space or just condensation or just moisture, has an opportunity to make its way into the roof system. It just drives home a point that there is a discontinuity in that vapor barrier, confirmed as part of this effort. So that's what this first section is talking about. At the clear story rising wall, we think that there is likely continuity there, but we're more concerned still, even though that you have membrane underneath your window from what we saw, that appears to tie with the roof vapor barrier, which is great. They should have some additional membrane flashing underneath the metal flashing that ties with the asphalt shingles. So you have, any moisture that gets on the blue membrane is just going to leak into your roof system. That's not good, right? So that's the big point I want to drive home with this first bullet here. The second one has to do with the cheek wall. That is no continuity whatsoever. All right, so how do we think the clear story rising walls are potentially leaking? As noted earlier, we have sealant joints that are deteriorated. Water gets through the metal panel, the GFRC panels, through the sealant joints, travels down the wall. From what we could see, there was some effort made to have a through wall flashing tie into the front face of the window. We don't have a full depiction of what happens between the windows, again, because we couldn't remove those panels, but we do see a direct potential source of leakage at the window locations, because they rely on a surface seal between the front edge of the windowsill, what I call a subsill, and a surface seal with the metal flashing. That surface seal is not a long-term sealant joint. We already saw it gapped in a lot of areas, and we see deteriorated sealant joint otherwise. So that, in our mind, is one of the main sources that could be contributing to leakage. Also, the windows themselves, though we didn't assess them as part of this effort, if those are allowing leakage through them, there is no pan flashing underneath those windows to capture that water and get it back out onto the roof. So that could be another source at the windows. Okay. All these bullets are just talking points on the clear story rising wall and some conditions that may also contribute to water getting in. I'm not going to go through all of them now. I can later if you'd like, but this for a whole first section discusses how water could be getting in at the clear story and rising walls, given our observations. At the cheek walls, again, we just talked about that step flashing without the upturn end dams. talked about how they have membrane coming out onto the horizontal instead of having an upturned back dam of sheet metal. So if that membrane's damaged, that could be another way water gets through, and we don't have that continuity and vapor barrier, right? So I think from what I recall, Hadley Public Library is seeing more interior leakage aligned with the cheek walls, which makes sense to me again, because there is that discontinuity between the roof and the wall. I don't believe that you're seeing much for interior leakage at the clear story rising wall. And that could be, again, due to the apparent continuity of that vapor barrier. What we are seeing, though, just to reinforce that, is we are seeing wet roof materials downslope of the clear story rising wall, which is telling me that water is getting through the sealant joints of the metal panels where they're deteriorated, hitting that blue membrane and traveling between the blue membrane and your roof insulation, causing it to get wet, so on and so forth. Okay. Again, just more discussion points on the cheek wall is there. So at the end of the day, what are we saying here? These areas require some work on them to make them watertight, to create continuity of the vapor barrier, and whether that happens as a standalone project or as part of a wholesale or partial roof replacement project, it should occur regardless of your method forward, because you're having this leakage happen, right? You're having these conditions that are allowing water either leaking to the interior or into your roof system. So this last section here where we talk about repair considerations, I'm going to try to keep it high level. We start with kind of a long-term repair considerations. What is the best thing you can do to get a long-term repair? Then I talk about, I break it up again. So long-term repair, clear story walls, long-term repair, cheek walls. Then I go into intermediate term repairs, kind of the middle level, right? If the first option is too expensive, you might consider the intermediate to get some years out of it until you can afford a full scale, right? And then the short term, we say it's not suggested, and you'll see why in a second, right? So again, long term, medium, short term is kind of how we've broken this out. So what do we need to do? It's our opinion at the clear story rising walls that you need to take out the bottom row of those panels, that sill panel all the way across, so you can assess and correct, not only assess the continuity of the vapor barrier between the roof and the wall, but provide reliable, continuous flashing. So even if water was to get through those panels in the future, even if the sealant joints are replaced in whole, sealant is a maintenance item that will fail and water will get through them at some point, you at least have that protection in place to kick the water back out in a reliable manner. That's the long-term repair in a nutshell, right? We do talk about in the long-term repair, the benefits of removing all those panels on the clear story so you could check the rest of the wall for continuous weather barrier. But the more you take apart and fix, the more it's going to cost. Window wise, for the long term, I mean, it would be beneficial to get a better sill pan flashing underneath these windows, because even if you do all this work and you're not able to get a full sill pan under your windows, if and when those windows leak, that is still a source of leakage without that protection in place. So we do talk about what the windows means, and I think we say if scheduled to remain in place, you do your best to try to tuck in a reliable flashing under the windows with them left in place. That's not going to give you full protection, but it'll improve what's there. The alternative is to remove and reinstall, or remove and replace the windows to get a better flashing in place. So these are all things that are worth discussing depending on what step Hadley Public Library and Hadley wants to take on these conditions. One other alternative is those GFRC sill panels. Let me go to a photo here real quick. In our mind, they're not needed, even architecturally. You could, plus the way they're attached is penetrating through your critical flashings, because it requires fasteners to attach. Yes, you can seal those fasteners, but we don't see a real reason why they would need to stay, because you could have a nice looking through-wall flashing, a metal through-wall flashing that remains exposed, and then you don't have to worry about fasteners going through that flashing, right? So it's just an alternative option for discussion that we note here as part of this long-term repair, and that's this row of panels at the bottom again here, right? Okay, let me skip back. So again, that's as quick as I can go for the clear story long-term suggested repairs. For the cheek walls, it's recladding the whole wall. It's taking all the brick apart, since the brick had a lot of the misaligned joints, bowing, so on and so forth. It's taken off the panels in the walls, since we saw that discontinuity in the insulation, and we saw discontinuity in the membranes and weather barrier. So the more expensive long-term repair is to completely remove everything on those cheek walls and fix the issue, and then reclad it. Okay. Let's say, all right, long-term repair, and there's no cost estimates as part of this effort. It was not included in our scope of services, right? We were just trying to find some of the issues and go through some schematic level options for your consideration. So a step down from the long-term repair, for the clear story, it's just trying to address the issue by only removing the sill panels. If by removing the sill panels, you can still get that tie-in, that reliable tie-in, and do your best you can at the windows without removing the windows, that might be enough to get you a reliable repair. For the cheek walls, it would try to be just focusing on the bottom portion of those cheek walls. So we say, at a minimum, remove 4 courses of brick above the step flashing, step it down, see if you can fix that issue and get a more reliable through-wall flashing with upturn end dams in there. And that could be enough to at least capture the water and get it back out of the wall system. Even so, with that method, it's not going to be possible to have a continuous vapor barrier with the roof unless you're stripping the roof off as well along that edge, right? But it might be possible to get at least a better medium-term solution, but just focusing on the bottom portion of that wall is what this section is talking about. Short-term repair, really, I should have started with what does long-term, intermediate term, and short-term mean in our mind. Long-term, first paragraph, we're talking 25 plus years of service life. Intermediate term, it's a big range, right? Because we don't know how effective it's going to be, but we imagine you can get between 5 and 25 years of service life out of it. Short term is 0 to 5 years of service life. So let me hop to the short term. What is the short term? In short, it's leaving everything in place at the clear story rising walls and replacing all the sealant joints with a very good sealant joint contractor that knows what they're doing, and installing the joint as the best practice way you can to try to get 20 years out of that sealant joint. Now, still, with any movement, there could be, even a perfect sealant joint, this still could get some issues with down the road. So that's why we're saying 0 to 5 years. But a properly designed sealant joint with the proper type of sealant can last 20 plus years still. So I want to at least note that, right? We never like to rely on pure sealants in our cladding design because, again, it's a maintenance item. We like to have those background flashings in place to capture water if and when it gets through the sealant joints. Similarly, on the cheek walls, remove and replace all sealant joints between those panels. But at the brick, since the constructability is not the best, we're talking do 100% repointing of that wall and consider a clear sealer. What you're trying to do with a clear sealer is seal some of those pores in the brick to help the brick act as more of a barrier, so it's less susceptible for water to soak through the brick and get into that cavity space. Our experience with clear sealers is that they only last up to 5 years, and their effectiveness depends on the applicator, the product, and starting on day one, it starts to lose effectiveness, right? So still at those weep joints, as wind's blowing at the weep joints, there's water can still get through the weep openings and still travel transversely. So it's a way to help the wall become more of a barrier, but again, we don't really care for either of these options because it's relying on sealant and trying to turn brick into something, well, a brick veneer into something it's not intended to be, which is a 100% water barrier. It's intended to allow water into it in a veneer system. So, well, how many do you want time here? That was I don't even see the time. So 30 minutes in. I'm going to turn it back over. Last thing I want to say is the last page, as always, is our appendix where we show where we did our openings, right? So just as a reference point on the roof plan where the openings were performed is the last page. I'll stop talking there and kind of open up back to you guys.
John, can you talk about what you found, what was found on site as it compared to either design documents or as-built drawings? How did any of these things, the discontinuities that you're pointing to, did those things show up in the original design, or were they a deviation that you could tell?
Great point. I believe I cover that in this report, but let's focus first on the clear story rising wall detail here. Now, I did find that they had a zoomed in detail at the windowsill specifically. I added that to the report right here. So what are they showing? They're showing this metal flashing here. Remember that kind of horizontal, vertical piece? Well, the design does show it just stopping on the horizontal here, shown in red. And it's not clear in the design, at least in the drawings, right? We didn't go do deep dive at the specs at this time to see if they covered themselves in the specs. But this is what the design showed. It doesn't clearly call for any type of tie-in to the membrane or any type of flashing provisions. So that is one difference. What did the contractor do? Well, he took this red line and he actually did his best. And sorry for using pronouns, but he or she did not they turned it up like this. And this is, like I said, they installed some kind of surface seal right here between that metal flashing and that front face of the window subsill, right? So that's a difference. The contractor made what appeared to be a more conscious effort of improving the detail, whether they were told to do so, did it on their own. We don't have that project documentation. But even so, it's our opinion that this is not industry standard, nor is it best practice the way the contractor did it or the way the designer designed it. One other thing to note is I'm going to change the color of this next line in a second, but they have this dashed line here. I'll show you what that does and why I keep on harping on that blue membrane tying with the vapor barrier. So it appears the design called for this blue line to be some kind of continuity with the wall between the roof and the wall vapor barrier. But there's no, if water is getting through the window or getting through this metal flashing, what's it doing? It's traveling between here, getting onto the brick, rolling this way, coming into the roof system, right? So either way, the way it's designed or the way it was installed, there's an issue here, right? In our opinion. And to drive home, since it's already on the screen, what do you do about this? There should be an additional, well, in a perfect world, this red line actually does something like this. It goes underneath the window, has an upturned back dam on the inside somewhere. So you have metal flashing, giving you the protection that you need. If water leaks through the window or wants to get through here, it can't because you have this protection in place. And then the next best thing would have been done too is have secondary flashings in place. So great, you have the vapor barrier continuity in that blue line. Well, there's no reason why they couldn't have or shouldn't have, and I'll change the color in a second, had an additional membrane coming down like this and going on top of your asphalt shingles underneath your metal flashing. So I'm going to call that the magenta line here. That would have provided a backup to the metal flashing to get any water kicked back out, right? So you don't have that in the design. You don't have that in the as-built. And that was the point I'm driving home in the narrative when I'm starting to talk about that stuff at the end of this report. I just didn't sketch it out. So that's one main thing to note about the clear story. Again, specifically at the window locations. At the panel locations between windows, the design appears to show the same concern. The roof ties in with the wall like this, but there is no, and they're still showing the metal flashing coming up and stopping right here. And this is an inverse detail. It's kind of confusing, right? It's mirrored from the orientation we're just looking at, but same idea, right? Metal flashing stops here. If and when water blows through the sealant joint up here, it's just going to be able to roll in, get behind the metal flashing, and get into the roof system. We didn't open up enough, or didn't have enough time to open up the panels to see what the as-built condition was per se between the windows, but we suspect that it's not continuous the way that we would want to see it. Again, that what they would have to do is tie into the weather barrier back here, have the membrane come out underneath the metal flashing, but also we would suggest, and I'll change the colors in a second, the metal flashing coming all the way back as well, which they did not do. Again, apologies for the live sketching. I hope it's making sense. Change this to teal.
Can I ask a question about when at the design stage, who is typically the professional that would be calling out what, and specifying what is, and reviewing what is industry standard, what, how this flashing, because obviously, as lay people, this is pretty complicated how water can travel. Who is typically the person that examines this and knows what they're talking about when they're designing a building or a roof system?
Sure. I mean, whether a designer follows industry standard or not, at the end of the day, the design is on the designer. In a lot of cases for new construction, the design team might have a building enclosure consultant giving them a peer review or a design review of their drawing set, where that building, and this is a role we often provide for architects and designers, and sometimes we help owners with this too, is we'll perform a design review of the design, specifically honing in on the continuity of the building enclosure. The four barriers: water, air, vapor, and thermal, right? Those are the four barriers we look for to have continuity on the outside of your building. So, at the end of the day, it's our opinion, it falls on the designer of record. Whether they choose to follow industry standard versus another term we often hear is best practice. Sometimes, I think in the report, I use the term industry standard. In some cases, best practice may have been a better choice. It really depends. But when I say industry standard, it begs the question, well, what's the standard that points to it? Well, I didn't go digging up those industry standard examples or sources as part of this report, but that's something that could come later if asked to do so. But industry standard doesn't necessarily mean best practice, right? What is standard across the industry could be middle of the road still, where a designer might go a step above that, right? There's code minimums. There's sometimes industry standards, which meets the code minimum or might be a level above, right? And then there's best practice, which could go a level above or even. So did that answer your question?
Yes. And it sounds like a lot of what you're seeing here does not even meet industry standard.
Right. And, the lack of the insulation continuity is a code violation on the walls, right? So the initial question is, well, comparison between the design and the as-built. From what we could see, we just talked about the clear story, right? What happens at the cheek wall? Well, the cheek wall, these two details, one is where there's brick, and which is this detail, and the other is where there's just GFRC panel, like at the uppermost slope portion of the cheek wall. So the designer actually is taking some conscious effort, it appears, to show the through all flashing coming all the way through the brick, all the way through the insulation, and it shows it at least touching the, excuse me for a second, the wall weather barrier. They call it the continuous air vapor barrier. But still, in these graphics, you know, if this is how the contractor installed it, and if this red line is metal flashing, that's not best practice, right? Best practice would be to have an additional strip of membrane coming over top to provide a reliable seal from the metal flashing to the wall, right? So like these are all the things that, you know, if assessed to do to look into and compare best practice versus industry standards can certainly be done. And sorry, I lost my place. Something that can be further analyzed. But so the as-built condition does not align with this from what we see. Actually, hold on, let me think about that for a second. Yeah. So what do we see? In some of the openings we just saw, well, we saw the metal flashing stopping on the horizontal like this. In some areas, we just saw a membrane doing this over top of the metal flashing. Well, there is no tie-in to the wall there. So where this condition occurs, it does not meet the design. All right. So that's another comparison between as built and as designed. Similar conditions over here. They do roof vapor barrier wise. The design appears to show continuity like this. From what we saw, though, that was not installed. So another difference between the design and the as-built. Again, I believe I try to cover those points. Probably, if you were to read the discussion section in all those bullets, I think that's where I cover it. And even up earlier, if I saw something that didn't meet the drawings, I may have noted it in the observation section. Any other questions?
John, would you expect that upon review, a building inspector would catch some of these oversights?
Probably not. I mean, it depends on the building inspector. It might depend on the building inspector. It might depend on the stage of construction that the building inspector goes out. But usually the building inspector doesn't go out until the closer end of the project when they're trying to pull the permit back, right? I mean, that'll be, you know, and it also might depend and vary by municipality, right? Boston, for example, has countless building inspectors for different wards of Boston, right? And they might have a little more stringent requirements that they impose on their building inspectors as part of reviewing ongoing construction practices. So I guess I don't quite know the answer, but if in this case the building inspector only went out to the project at the end of the job, I wouldn't say that these jump out as being obvious issues, right? Because a lot of it is concealed within the wall system. And if the wall system was already built, then they're not going to capture it. If on day one you started complaining about leakage, that might be a different animal. It might have stemmed an earlier evaluation and finding the stuff earlier that the building inspector could have caught. But yeah, I guess that's the best I can comment on that one for now.
Thanks.
Is this level of, I don't know the word for it, but there's so many problems here. It brings forth the word incompetence. Have you seen this in other projects that you've been called in on, this level of bad stuff?
We see everything, right? We see best practice, we see subpar installation. It kind of runs the gamut. It's not uncommon to run into issues like this, but also, you know, there's still a big gap for this particular project. Well, why did this occur? And we still haven't to this day really been requested to opine on level of responsibility between the different parties involved in the project. But some of the stuff I'm seeing on this project, I've seen elsewhere as well. In my 12 years or so of evaluating buildings and designing building enclosure.
So this is not uncommon, this level of incompetence.
It's unfortunately not as uncommon as it should be, but that doesn't make it right. We run into, there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen on a project for it to be installed properly. These tricky transition details, how many trades are involved here? Well, first of all, you have a GC that's supposed to be responsible for everything. All the subcontractors, even in public bid work, their job as GC, even though they're usually kind of stuck picking the lowest responsible file subbidder, they're still responsible for that file subbidder and being familiar enough with the design documents to catch them not meeting the design. But they're also responsible for raising a red flag or an RFI if there's something that they see that's not right seeming. So that doesn't necessarily, let the designer off the hook in those moments. But there's project documentation here that we still have not seen or been asked to fully evaluate, and that is field reports, review of mock-ups, full meetings during construction, correspondence between the project team, right? What is happening over however many months and years this thing was built, especially at these transitions here. But at these transitions, so you have the GC, you have the roofer file subbidder, you have the masonry file subbidder for the cheek walls, and you have the GFRC panel installer, all kind of converging into this corner, right? So the sequence of work has to be done properly for this to get installed properly. It could very well have been that there was just poor sequence and not intentionally they missed some steps here, right? But it wasn't caught, right? So it happens, right? It happens, very rarely do you get a bill that is 100% in accordance with the contract documents. But what is not in accordance will vary from project to project.
So, John, if you take this further, where does the OPM fall in all of this?
Well, so the OPM's role, owner's project manager, is to have the best interests of the owner, right?
Yeah.
Throughout the project. I'm not an OPM personally. I guess we do serve as almost OPMs in a lot, whether it's private or public, because, as the designer of a record or as a consultant to the owner, we're trying our best on the behalf of the owner to have those continuous reliable barriers, right? And where along the way, we try to notify the owner of pros and cons when certain topics come up, right? So what's the OPM's role in this particular project? I don't have their contract in front of me, but I would imagine they would have been responsible for coordinating meetings, documenting the project on the owner's behalf, asking the right questions at the right time. They may have been, had some site visit involvement that they should have been performing and doing their own site visit reviews of the design to some capacity, right? But so should the designer, right? The designer is to pull a permit and to close a permit. They're supposed to sign off of the initial and final affidavit that the building was constructed. And I don't know the exact language on these affidavits, but usually we say, from what we observed, it was installed in general accordance with the contract documents, general accordance with, right? So there's designer, CA, construction administration too, that falls into play here. What did they see at these locations when they were being constructed? Skin in the game is what it comes down to. You have a GC, you have a designer, you have subcontractors, you have the OPM. In some instances, we're asked to help assign a level of responsibility, but we have not done that on this project at this time because we were not asked to do so yet.
Okay, so John, what would you need if you were asked to be able to assign responsibility for these defects on this project?
I think is Patrick, are you there? Sorry if
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah, absolutely.
Did I provide you with kind of an initial draft proposal for consideration for kind of, I don't know if it was expert witness services. I forget. I thought I did. Basically,
I don't remember if there was a proposal for that. I mean, I know you mentioned that that is something that you could provide. I don't remember if we actually got a quote to do it, because at this point, you know, that the town council has not suggested that we're going in that direction. The select board has not
yeah.
decided on the direction, so.
So generally speaking, it would be a proposal for whether it's expert witness services or just an additional proposal to help provide some opinion on level of responsibility, however you want it worded. You know, we could certainly provide that proposal, but before we even do that, we would suggest pulling town council in to see, you know, is this something that the town really wants to pursue? Because they could probably speak to it better.
I meant more in terms of what documentation, if you were called on to do that, and I'm not saying that you would be, what documentation would be, other than what you have, would you need to come to some kind of conclusion about that?
Understood. Okay, great. So I think we continue to list off a bunch of documents we haven't seen when you're reading these reports. Field reports by the designer, field reports by the OPM, full project meeting minutes where everyone's involved. Unfortunately, as cumbersome as it is, email correspondence between all the parties has pertinent information in there. So in some cases, you tell someone to do something via email, and that becomes a change to the contract in some instances, right? So any project documentation could have valuable information in there that may play a role in assigning the level of responsibility on the various project team members involved. In some cases, the owner might have said something that can also, you know, hurt the owner in some instances, right? Whether it was a value engineering decision or something else. But the question then asked, was the owner given enough information to make a informed decision on that particular topic, right? And that is the responsibility of OPM or the designer in that instance. So I guess any and all documentation that you see on a project becomes open for review. How do you get that documentation? Typically, I mean, look at all the people involved. All those project team members have documentation still on their servers, probably, hopefully, or in paper form. How do you get that? Usually that's town council determining if a subpoena is necessary, if there's going to be a suit, right? But until we see everything, it's hard to say for sure what is going to be in those documents, right? So it can be a pretty exhaustive, expensive effort to go through project documentation, especially on something of this size.
Does anyone else have further questions?
And if at any point, you know, you want to have an offline discussion with town council involved, we're happy to hop on a call just to talk through what their thoughts are or whatnot. But again, at this time, I'm hesitant to assign responsibility because we have not seen everything. We have some suspicions here and there, but there's still a mountain of documentation we have not yet seen to be able to point. I can speak to industry standard. I can speak to best practice. I could speak to what we're seeing with our observations on why it's leaking, and I can speak to how to fix it. Who's responsible for the cost, though, is still, something that if you're trying to recoup any money, would have to be a discussion separate from this meeting.
Understood. Anything else? Okay. As always, thank you very much, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And also, as
Excellent.
always,
Job explaining things
Mhm.
that are foreign.
I try. I was on the other side too when I first started this this career path, if you will. It was a big learning curve for me 12 years ago. So I get it. So in the meantime, though, if there is anything that comes up, Patrick, all of you have my contact information. I'm happy to hop on separate calls as needed to answer any of the questions that might come up. In the meantime, I think we'll hang tight and wait to hear from you. Is there another meeting upcoming that I should be aware of, whether it's with the whole town or?
Not currently.
Okay.
Nothing is set up.
We're waiting for some feedback from the town. We have shared your report, and we're waiting to find out what the direction will be when they're done reviewing it. But to date, we have not heard back yet.
Okay. I will hang tight.
Thank you, John.
All right. Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Is there any additional conversation you would like to have about the report? Or shall we move on? Okay. In that case, we will go to the minutes of October 14th. Do I have a motion to approve? So moved. Second? Thank you. I had a couple of things for clarification. Baker and Taylor has not yet actually closed. Their timeline is through the end of the year.
So wait, do we just pass the minutes and then we're doing this? Or do we want to change the minutes? I'm just asking.
There's a motion and a second.
Okay, I didn't know.
And so we were at
discussion. Okay, that was the question.
Okay. The other one that I think would be helpful to clarify is that we asked for 10 computers in order to fill the remaining spaces for computers. Just to explain what those 10 computers were for.
Can you just read the new sentence? Like how you want, what you wanted to say? We initially asked the town for 10 computers to
fill the remaining spaces for them.
I added that and I changed the Baker and Taylor to close at the end of the year.
Thank you. And then on point G, a complete freeze on hiring in the town, period.
Ugh.
And then we don't have anything we will need to discuss on the special town meeting warrant. And then the last thing under point 3 under G, at the end of the sentence, have it read, have to return the 3.9 million MBLC grant. Did anybody else have anything else that,
I have a question about 3E. We will eventually make it part of the maintenance budget. So that new server is used by the whole town. Are we paying a part of that? Are we paying for the server?
Sorry, I have to read the sentence. Where is it?
Right there. E.
Um. I believe this is referring to the lighting server, which is being has been replaced. The server itself is what the company that programs the lights uses to communicate in and diagnose problems with the lighting system. So it's basically dedicated to that purpose. The server, the physical piece of equipment though, which came with the building, which was spec'd and installed as part of the original lighting design, failed. So it had to be replaced. But it's not owned by, I mean, it's, when I say owned, it's the responsibility for it is going to be with Northeast IT, the town's vendor. They are going to be responsible for making sure that it receives updates and that it functions properly. So it doesn't have any purpose beyond allowing for the lighting programmers who are not in town, who are remote somewhere out in the world, to get in and look at what's going on within the system, program it, change the schedule, and that kind of thing. Otherwise, they are just completely blind. And when we call an electrician, the electrician says, you need to talk to the lighting company and they can't log in. So you can't tell them what's wrong. The electricians cannot diagnose these problems without the cooperation of the lighting company.
So I guess my question was, if we're sharing services with the town, do we share costs with the town? How much of the cost do we bear as the library?
I think what I was probably trying to point to when we were speaking about this last time is that typically, the maintenance costs of the building are not borne by the departments. It's the costs have been centralized within the town. But right now, if we want the lights to work, because there's no money in the budget for an added cost at the town level, we're having to bear it until such time as the town can find the money and budget for it in another budget cycle. So this year we'll mention this to the town and say, are you able to incorporate this? As
So
part of
maybe
the
I should add the word town. We will eventually make it part of the town. The hope is to eventually make it part of the town's maintenance budget.
Yeah.
That, I think, does that clear up, I think that, Wayne, that kind of clears up your question,
Yeah,
right?
or you could
and then
even say
delete the
the
rest of
town's,
that sentence.
you could either say it's
Yes.
part of the town's maintenance or IT budget, because it straddles both of those things.
Okay,
Okay, I'm trying to understand, are we gonna pay this or is the town gonna pay it?
We are going to
Right
pay it
now, we're
until the town is able to do so.
Yes, because there is no money. We have sources of money, whether it is in leftover construction. I mean, this contract really is an operating expense. It's not a capital expense. So it's, we're using state aid money. We haven't received a bill actually, we have received a bill. I think it's going to be coming out of state aid, which is, can be used for any purpose.
It might help Joanne to say new server that controls the building lights. Because I think if you use the word server, you tend to think of something much not so limited and specific. In that case. With the changes, all in favor of approving? Thank you. We do not have any public to comment. Director's report.
Okay, so we are, once again, we had a very busy October, another month where usage, circulation, patron visits was up, in some cases significantly. Patron count was up 15% over the same month a year ago. So we are again, we're consistently seeing over 3,000 patron visits per month, which is just, these are unprecedented numbers. 100 for this month, to put that in perspective, 130 patrons per day, 128 to be exact, but about 130, and an average of 21 patrons entering the library per hour, which is just very steady clip.
Can you say that one more time? How many per hour?
128 per day and 21 per hour. It is in the, this is in the report. Though.
Yeah,
It's in
I
the
have it
report.
below, yep.
And we, in October, again, we're busy with programs. We have 35 programs for all ages with 541 patrons attending those programs. We also had 135 meeting room appointments, which is a lot. As far as other news,
Excuse me, just
Yeah.
real quick, do you have any sense or any data to suggest that we are still perhaps a destination of choice for Amherst residents?
only anecdotally, we haven't really been looking at it.
Okay.
I think people have stopped walking in and identifying themselves as such, as it just sort of is what it is. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's.
Well,
it's-
just, I mean, 13% increase
Yeah.
is quite a bit. And so I just wondered if,
I think it's a combination of factors. I think that's definitely part of it, but.
okay,
But, it's sort of wherever they're coming from, it's a little bit of everything, because we're seeing, the use of meeting rooms is just constant. You normally, in the past, I've been able to have the door that sits in front of my desk. Again, this is just an anecdotal piece of information, but I used to be able to have that door between my office into the local history room open so that I could see what was going on, people coming and going, have some situational awareness of what's happening out in the main space. Now, I would say about 80% of the time, that door is, every time I open it, somebody walks in to use the room and I then have to close the door back. So it just goes to show you that there are more people just for walk in, you're just coming in and saying, do you have a room
Yeah.
that I can use? And you say, yeah, it's free. So help yourself. But that is fairly steady. It's busier than it has been. And I think the programming activity is bringing a lot of people in. The children's room, the playroom is still acting as a magnet for whole groups of whole groups of people that are coming in 5 at a time. Mom, dad, 3 kids, or whatever it is, whatever the family formation is. And so, the additional computers that we did purchase through the capital funding, the 5 additional computers have been installed. They're immediately all in use. They're not, it's not uncommon right now to look down the row of the adult computers and see them
all being used.
almost all of them in use. And then to the left and see, there's 3 teenagers on the computers and there's 2 kids in the kids room. I mean, it's constantly busy, and along with that, of course, comes all sorts of random troubleshooting around printing. I need to, do something. I need help with my email. I need help with something. So that is also driving up the amount of time that we're spending on computer-related problems, computer-related maintenance.
Patrick, is there a charge per page for printing or no?
We charge for certain types of printing. So, if you're printing a tax document or whatever, we don't charge for that kind of thing because, for example, it's a lot easier and a lot more convenient for us rather than to get, even for free from the IRS, a bunch of tax documents then. So it just makes sense for certain things like that are like, rather than having to figure out how to get the things, to just say, we can get that off the internet for you, but here it is, and go do what you need to do. Other things, if people come in and say we're copying, knitting patterns or whatever, yes, and we always accept donations for this kind of service, and people put money in the milk can. So there is that, but we did look at one point for for example, to see if we could get a coin operated situation, but the actual cost of leasing such a machine was actually being exorbitant. So we still don't see the volume of printing that we felt we needed to go down that road. And most of the time people are printing like 1 or 2 pages. So that's all happening. The lighting server, again, we're still working through that to consolidate all of the pieces of equipment into the right network that will all be overseen by the same IT vendor, because right now some of the equipment is on one network that will eventually be the town's fiber optic network. And one piece of equipment is on the CW Mars network. So trying to get it all vertically integrated onto the one network that the town controls, so that the IT people do not have to be working with CW Mars to troubleshoot their own equipment. We're trying to get it all in line in one place. And that's been a little bit challenging. But the lights, for all intents and purposes, the lights are acting normally. So when for all of our day-to-day activities, the scheduling is back to normal. The lights go off when they're supposed to go off. When you enter a room like this, for instance, the wall panels work correctly, which is a huge relief. And the other stuff will sort itself out with a little more time and persistence. I did want to mention, well, I'll mention 2 other things. One is that we're going to participate in something called the Citizens Academy. I may have heard about this. We're going to be doing our part of this on Thursday at 7. Wait, is it 6 or 7? You're in. Yes, we're going to be doing our thing at 6. Sue, Julia, and I will be. The format for this is that we're going to give a short tour of the library. Again, this is based on what Jennifer Sanders James laid out as what would be helpful to people, we think. And so we're going to give a short tour of the building so people can see it. And there may be some people that have never been or have only seen one part of the library. We'll take them through the whole building. We'll come back in here. We'll have a little overview. I'm going to share some information, sort of like what I do here in terms of like what a typical month is, or what the current year has been like, again, compared to what it was like when we were in the Goodwin Library. I still like that comparison because I think it shows how far we've come in a short period of time in terms of just doing a transformative level of activity around the library. I think that it can't be overstated. So we'll be going through a few things like that. Then we will have a question and answer, whatever people want to ask us. They can ask us anything about library services, or and we'll do our best to answer those questions. And then again, per Jennifer's request, we're going to have some interactive hands-on stuff where people can do library work. Some of the things that we do every day or every week. So, people will unpack an interlibrary loan delivery bin, check things in, write slips, see how that works, file the books on the shelf for Jack to come and pick up his holes. And we'll have people do a pull list to pull the lists that are going out to other libraries or our own patrons. It's like an Easter egg hunt, so that'll be fun. And we'll have folks go and empty the Dropbox out front so they can see how that works, and then check some of those things in. And that's going to take up our hour pretty easily. So we're looking forward to it. I think it'll be a fun time. I don't even fully know who's coming. I know you're coming.
I can send you the list of participants.
It doesn't matter. I prefer to be surprised.
Do you remember how many?
It's 15. Yeah, I think it's capacity 15. Yeah. It's good.
One thing that I found really interesting is one of the participants does not live in Hadley, but he's one of the dispatchers down the street, and he was interested in knowing more about the town.
Wow.
So he got brownie points in my book.
Last thing I'll mention, I did want to mention because I thought this was interesting. We did get we were informed by the inspector's office that someone had not filed the complaint because there was no there was no identifying information, or there was no report on this, but someone had gone in and verbally complained about the operation of the front doors and the weight of them, which admittedly has been a problem. The door closing company is supposed to be coming back to, I hope they would have already done this, but they're going to see if they can address the weight and or resistance of that door, so that as it's closing, there's no minimizing the chance that you could be pushed back by it, or I don't know. But I mean, certainly if you were, a small child would not be able to push that door open if it were as it was closing. So we want to see if we can make it a little.
It's a shame they didn't feel comfortable enough to just tell us. Yeah, no, I know, I'm just saying,
Go about it the way that they do.
Yeah.
But no one here, the specific incident that prompted this, no one here was aware that it had happened. It hadn't been reported to anyone on the staff directly. So, it was truly anecdotal, and the inspector just, made sure to pass it along. I passed it along to Gary, or somewhere in that realm, and Gary's gonna look into it to see what we can do to adjust it, and we'll try to see if we can look at other doors that may be heavy, but the front door itself is the heaviest one, because it is mechanically operated. It just doesn't swing freely. It's not normal level of resistance, and I'm not exactly sure what we can do other than possibly work on better signage to indicate that the one door is lighter and easier to operate manually than the other. And that's all I have. Really, there's nothing at this time that I would ask that you take action on. So
Any questions or anything else? Do you want to try to do organizational resiliency from the strategic plan?
is that a dare?
I
Yeah, I
don't
think-
know. It's supposed to just be a question. Is anybody still awake?
Could that be tabled to next month?
It could be. In which case,
Is a motion necessary?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
I will also give you a preview of some of the things for next month. There will be the director's review. And if you have not yet, I didn't look to see who had and had not yet today, but just a reminder.
It's the 17th, right, there too?
I said the 17th, but
Okay,
earlier is better, because then I can enlist you and Jack to be part of the initial review, because you offered. And the other thing that we are going to need to do sooner rather than later is the director's contract, which expires at the end of this fiscal year.
Which would be June of 26.
Yes. But that's the other biggie that's out there. So we have three.
But the budget that will fall in, we're gonna have to submit that. So we have to kind of know
Mhm.
that information this January. I don't know when they're gonna ask for the budget to be submitted, but it's typically late December or the January.
So that is why it sounds like it's really early, but it's not really early because of the budgeting cycle. Okay, well, if we are going to table that, and does anyone else have anything else that they would like to comment on, ask, or report, or?
A question, there was someone who's going to be using the space on Sundays? Do you know, has that started to
Yes.
happen yet?
Yes, so what we're doing so far, is we determined that the easiest way to do this for right now, without the electronic access system working, was to provide a key. So essentially, they're checking out a key from us, the person that has made the reservation, and is familiar with the meeting room policy, borrows the key. enters the building through the store, uses the space, they're able to access the bathrooms. That's the key that they have. There's a duplicate of the same key in the on the, what do you call it, the realtor locks on the handle.
The lockbox thing, yeah.
Which I decided originally, we thought, well, we could use that, give them the number, and then periodically change the combination. But the reason we didn't do that, well, a couple of reasons, but the main reason was that I was concerned about the potential for someone to lock themselves out of the building with the only available key to get back in. Whereas if we keep the key in the realtor box, if someone gets locked out, they can call an emergency contact. I'm one of those emergency contacts, and when you're one of them locally, so if something comes up, someone can be reached and we can walk them through how to get back into the building or work with whoever needs to be contacted to do that. So it worked well. At the end of the meeting, the reserver of the room takes the key, which is on a big piece of metal, painted orange, that so you can't miss it. It's hard to lose, and they pass it through the book return slot, and then we have it securely there in the drop box Monday or whatever. So far, these have just been Sunday gatherings here, and so we've done it twice, and I think they're going to do it one more time. I think right now there's one more that's scheduled, and so far it's gone well. The interior of the building is secured. It has been, it's been easy for the staff to secure the building at the end of the day, before the meeting, so it seems to do well.
Thanks.
Okay, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?